Thank you for joining us. We are so excited to have you all today. I am Liliana Bolaños, and I am a policy analyst at Voices for Utah Children. We are a children's advocacy organization in Salt Lake City, and we are co-hosting this webinar tonight with Immivisa Law Group and the American Business Immigration Coalition, and also joined by a representative of the Utah Division of Professional Licensing. So I'm going to go through and introduce each of our panelists today and let them share a few words about their organization, and then we'll just jump right into the panel questions. So I'll start with my co-host Enrique Sanchez with the American Business Immigration Coalition. Enrique, can you tell us a little bit more about ABIC and your role at ABIC?
Yes, thank you, Liliana, and thank you all for being here tonight. My name is Enrique Sanchez. I am the Intermountain State Director for the American Business Immigration Coalition, ABIC for short. We are a bipartisan coalition of over 1,400 employers, chambers of commerce, trade associations in 19 states, and we work on common sense immigration solutions through the economic lens. And so I myself am a DACA recipient, grew up here in Utah. And so it's always great to be working on immigration related issues here in the state of Utah because they are issues that impact myself and my family.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that, Enrique, and for sharing your story as well. Now I'll pass some time over to Jacob Tuimaualuga with Immivisa Law Group.
Thanks, Lily. Hi, everyone. I'm Jacob Tuimaualuga. I am an immigration attorney at Immivisa Law Group, and we specialize in employment-based visas, so both the temporary kind and the permanent ones. I went to law school at J. Reuben Clark at Brigham Young University at BYU, and before that, I worked as a paralegal for an immigration law firm in Utah. So I'm a first-generation American as well. My father immigrated to the U.S., so I have a personal, connection to immigration law as well, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity I've had to work in this profession and meet so many interesting people who I know have bettered my life and bettered my family's life. So I'm thankful for the opportunity to be here with you all today.
Thank you so much, Jake. And now I'm going to let Alexander Bybee with the Utah Division of Professional Licensing introduce himself.
Thank you. It's exciting to be able to share with everyone. The Division of Professional Licensing is a part of the Department of Commerce. Our office oversees over 60 different professions and the different license types within those professions. I myself am the International Credentialing Manager, so I get to help immigrants who received training or education in their countries navigate licensure and how to obtain their licenses here in Utah. And outside of that, I have my mother, who is an immigrant, and all of my wife and in-laws are all immigrants too. So happy to be an advocate in any way I can.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing. We also have a community member on the call, Arun, and we will be able to hear a little bit more about his story as well later on in the webinar, which we're so excited to hear about. So I'm just going to dive right into some of the panel questions, and then you all submitted personal questions as well when you RSVP'd for this. We got over 20 questions, all really, really great questions, and we'll do our best to get to most of those today. If questions arise during the panel, feel free to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen, and we will try to get to those as well. But please know that if we don't get to your question during this time, we will make an effort to reach out to you via email to answer any questions that go unanswered. Or you can also reach out to me directly, and we can make sure to help you to the best of our abilities. So Enrique, I'm going to start with you. As we all know, a few weeks ago, we got the election results, and we are anticipating a new president this upcoming session. And so I wanted to ask you a little bit about what the American Business Immigration Coalition is expecting or anticipating. What are the potential changes that we can expect, whether they be federal laws or local laws under this new Trump administration? And what is the potential of it affecting Utahns?
Yeah, so under a Trump administration, what we definitely expect to see is heightened enforcement on immigration measures as well as stricter visa policies potentially. And so right now, what we are doing is working with our business leaders who are are worried about their workforce, right? Because I think that that's um, the huge aspect about business economy is the fact that the workforce is made up of a lot of folks who are undocumented, especially in areas like the agriculture. And so what we are hopeful about is that the Trump administration will be able to look at this through common sense lenses and realize that, by actually providing possible solutions for DACA recipients, for long-term immigrants, for U.S. citizen spouses, that this will help with inflation, especially since that was a huge economic issue during this past election. And so, um, what might happen, is reduced access to some of those employment-based visas. But for Utah businesses, it's so important for us to keep them well in the know and keep them active, especially with our congressional delegation, because what will happen with some of these policies is that it would exacerbate the workforce shortages, particularly in the areas that uh, DACA recipients or other immigrants are a huge part of, such as agriculture, healthcare, construction, which heavily rely on immigrant workers. And so at ABIC, what we're committed to advocating for is a balanced bipartisan reform that addresses these challenges while protecting businesses and workers who are vital to the state's economy. But it's also important to note that it's possible to have a secure border and also work on ways that immigrants are able to legalize themselves in the country.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that. I definitely can attest to a lot of the fear and concern that community members have. Me personally, for some of my friends and family. So we really appreciate you keeping us informed and also advocating for those common sense solutions, right? Speaking a little bit to some of the claims that the president-elect has made, he has talked a little bit about DACA, right? The Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program. And we have some on the call with us today. For those that don't know, DACA, or Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, is a program that has allowed over 7,000 Utahns to legally work in our state. We understand that this program is currently in the courts and could jeopardize their ability to work legally in the state and in the country. Can you give us an update on the current status of DACA and what this could mean for our community members?
Yeah, it still remains in legal limbo. Unfortunately, DACA has been a political football since its inception in 2012, to be honest. And so, as a DACA recipient myself, every year we live with the fear that it'll get struck down by the courts. And so, no different this year. It is in the courts. We do anticipate that it will make its way up to the Supreme Court, with potentially a decision made in spring or in the summer of next year. That being said, we have a different Supreme Court makeup now than we did in 2020, when the Supreme Court voted 5-4 to maintain DACA, which at the time, what happened was that the way that the Trump administration was trying to rescind the program, it wasn't done in a legal correct way. And so that's why the Supreme Court actually stopped it from ending. But as I mentioned, we have a new Supreme Court. It's made up of more conservative judges, and so we do anticipate a negative decision. But what that could mean is that, Congress typically acts when there is a crisis. And so if the DACA program were to end, that means that, 600,000 to 800,000 of us DACA recipients around the country would lose our work permits in a period of 24 months. And so that would be a devastating blow to the US's workforce. And so what we hope that this would create is a opportunity for Congress to act and finally provide a legal pathway for DACA recipients to earn a pathway to citizenship.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that. And again, we have heard the president-elect refer to DACA recipients often, but it still is unclear, right, what exactly will happen regardless of who is president. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I have one last question for you, again, regarding DACA. Recently, we've had news about the D3 waiver and specifically how it enables DACA recipients to apply for certain work visas. Can you provide a little bit more insight into those D3 waivers?
Yeah, and the D3 waiver, it was expanded to allow DACA recipients to um, apply for this. What a D3 waiver is a forgiveness from the Department of Homeland Security for many kinds of immigration violations. And so an example of those violations include being unlawfully present in the United States. And so what that would do is it would allow for DACA recipients and dreamers without DACA, who oftentimes have at least one of those violations since we were brought to the U.S. as children. It would allows for us to be able to get an employer sponsorship visa, and it would remove or forgive that violation, which would then allow for us with what's it called? So like it would allow for us to be sponsored by our employer. And then also that would kind of make it a pathway into the green card process. And so once we have a D3 waiver and a temporary visa, that means that that specific individual would not be dependent on the DACA program. And so that would allow for them to then apply for a green card. But I do want to specify that it is a complicated pathway, and it's very specific requirements for it, and so not I would say a very small amount of people would be able to qualify for it. And I think that your employer has a huge part in that. So speaking to your employer, first of all, to let them know that they have the ability to do this would be one of the first steps.
Great. Thank you so much. And again, thank you for all you do at ABIC, the American Business Immigration Coalition. Feel free to follow them on Instagram, check out their website. They post a lot of very helpful updates for the community. So thank you again, Enrique, for your contributions, and we'll get back to you during the Q&A. Now I'd like to talk a little bit to Jacob at Immivisa Law Group. For those who are just now joining, Jake is an immigration attorney and the owner of Immivisa Law Group. Jake, we have obviously a lot of questions and a lot to cover in regards to employment-based immigration. Can you provide examples of employment-based visas that enable immigrants and newcomers to contribute to Utah's economy and workforce?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a plethora of visas available, both temporary and permanent, for immigrants to work in the U.S. lawfully. You can do so either through skilled or unskilled employment, meaning if you have a degree or if you do not, right? I will say some of the most common ones that we work on are H-1B visas or H-2B visas. There are investment visas called the E-2 that apply for certain country nationals. There are TN visas and O visas and P. Basically, you could think of a letter of the alphabet, and there's probably a visa associated with it. As far as the permanent visas go, for employment-based visas for you to obtain permanent residency or a green card, there are EB visas, and immigration is not very creative, so they name them EB1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 are the employment-based immigrant visas. So yeah, there's a lot of options depending on somebody's background, depending on their employer's involvement, and pretty much most significantly, your educational and professional credentials. One visa may be better for you than the other, and you may be qualified for multiple.
Awesome. So just making sure I'm understanding correctly, you mentioned that the EB visas, these are visas that someone can use to self-petition for a green card, meaning that they don't need a sponsor, whether that be a relative or a US company. Someone can self-petition through EB visas, and through these other ones, typically a sponsor is required. And in most cases, a US company. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the majority of employment-based green cards require a sponsor, meaning a US company that essentially asks the US government to award you a visa on grounds that they cannot find a qualified US worker to do your job. However, there are a couple of visas that allow a qualified foreign national to self-apply, essentially independent of any company's involvement, where you can ask immigration or ask the US government to award you a green card, an immigrant visa, based on your own individual accolades. So the two most common ones we use are the EB1A and the EB2 NIW visa.
Great. Thank you so much for clarifying that. I oftentimes do get a lot of questions, about how someone can find a sponsor, right? Or how they could qualify for an EB visa that doesn't require a sponsor. And I know that it depends on, it's a case by case, right? And that there really is no solid answer for everyone. But can you tell us briefly what kinds of people would qualify to self-petition through visas like EB1, EB2?
Absolutely. Yeah, I definitely think of these employment visas more like art than science. You're kind of just baking the stuff that you have and hoping that immigration likes the result. So as a high level in general, immigration really likes the educated. So academic the more academic achievement that you have, the more education you have, the better, frankly. So if you have, for example, for an EB2 national interest waiver, this visa is a special visa for people who have an advanced degree, meaning you have either a master's degree or higher, or a bachelor's degree and 5 years of experience post-graduation. That's the minimum qualifications to apply for a national interest waiver. Now, for an EB1A, education is not as important as it is for an EB2. Essentially, what an EB1A self-sponsorship requires is extraordinary ability, for lack of a better term. Historically, people would think of someone like Elon Musk or Albert Einstein as somebody who would merit approval for these EB1A visas. But I found even people who are regular professionals who have, let's say, attained successful careers, who've been working for a long time, who have a number of successful professional accomplishments, can also apply for EB1As. It's not out of the realm of possibility. So overall, to shorten my answer, immigration loves education and experience. So the more that you can do with regards to furthering both of those, the better. The second thing that I would work on, and I know it's kind of hard to try and quantify this, but immigration also loves publicity. So I know humility is a virtue, obviously, but when it comes to U.S. immigration, you kind of want to gas yourself up, for lack of a better term. The more press you have, the more that you can essentially talk about yourself and get yourself out there, the better it will help your case. That's basically it.
Great, great. Thank you so much for sharing that, Jacob. And we will get back to you later as we get to some of the Q&A questions. So thank you so much for what you shared so far. We also have on the call today Arun, a community member that lives here in Utah, who has successfully obtained two of the visas that Jake has mentioned. Jake was actually his attorney on these cases. So it's the H-1B1 and the EB-1 visa. So now I'm going to turn the time over to Arun, and he's going to share a little bit about his experience. So first of all, thank you so much, Arun, for joining us today. My first question for you is, could you share a little bit about your background and what brought you to the United States?
Sure. Thank you, Liliana. Good evening, everyone. My name is Arun. I have master's degree and almost experience of 25 years of managing the IT side. And I work for a renowned IT company. Um, so initially, I mean, I live here in Salt Lake City with my family. And initially, I was not intending to come to United States. I was working for European Commission in their in Europe region, and I was enjoying the journey until I was brought here by one of the employers, and there my immigration journey started. I'm one of the luckier one to, cross this journey, and I understand what your worries and your questions would be. So I'm here to represent one of you.
Great. And thank you so much for spending the time with us today and sharing your story. We really appreciate it. Arun, we understand that you applied for and successfully obtained two visas, the ones that I previously mentioned, which were the H-1B1 and the EB-1 visa. Coming back to you really quick, Jake, can you explain a little bit more about these two visas that you helped Arun apply for?
Yeah, Arun is a stud, so he didn't need my help really for this one, which is, ultimately what it comes down to. Your accomplishments rest on your own laurels. But just as a high level overview of the H-1B, so the H-1B is a specialty occupation visa. Essentially, what it means is it's for people who are going to work in a position that requires a bachelor's degree or the equivalent in experience. So traditionally, you would think of somebody who's like an engineer or an accountant or somebody where you would need to go to, get a 4-year degree in order to work in. That's how the H-1B works. Those are the most common ones. So most international students who come here or come to the States to study, and when they have their OPT, occupational practical training that they receive after graduation, essentially their goal is to do a good job for their US employer so their company will sponsor them for this H-1B visa. It's a great springboard to give you 6 years total authorization, 2 segments of 3 years, and to help set you up for a future green card application. So that's how the H-1B works. The other visa that Arun ended up applying for is the EB-1A visa. So this is commonly known again as the Einstein visa. You think of somebody like Elon Musk. While Arun himself is somewhat like Elon Musk or Einstein, again, you don't have to be to that level in order to be approved. There are 10 possible requirements. You need to meet at least 3 of them. And then lastly, what you need to do is to show essentially to the U.S. immigration officer that you're part of the top echelon of your field. Essentially, this is like a gut feeling where immigration is just going to look at all your evidence and say, hey, do I think this guy or gal is one of the top people in their profession? That's how that works.
Great. Thank you so much for that summary. So just to recap with the H-1B, which, excuse me, I was saying H-1B1, but H-1B, you would need a U.S. company to sponsor you. And again, like you mentioned, doing a great job with some sort of OPT or internship volunteer opportunities could be a great way to build those relationships with U.S. employers. And then you mentioned the EB-1A, which does not require a U.S. Company sponsor, but it's more based on your accomplishments, whether it be educational and professional. And that's what qualifies you to self-petition and not need that sponsor. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's exactly correct. Yep, you've got it, Lily.
Great. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I want to come back to you, Arun. Now that we kind of have an idea of the 2 visas that you qualified for, which again is so impressive that you found a U.S. company that was willing to sponsor you, and then that you were able to eventually get a green card through the EB-1A. since you self-petitioned based on your professional and educational experiences. Arun, what kinds of challenges did you encounter during the process of applying for these visas, if any?
Yes, that's a good question. I must state here that one of the important factors which really matters a lot is the time delays. Immigration affairs are little time consuming. They need a lot of patience and lot of pre-work. So it is very important to stay connected with your attorney to make sure what exactly is happening, and of course like waiting for the time to come, because these things do take time. They're not going to happen overnight. They want to do a proper thorough checking of what you are doing, and is it really in line with what you are expected to get. So they do you know take time. And of course the major thing is that insecurity. While you're going through this journey, you would always feel that there is an insecurity and uncertainty of what is your future next. These are some of those challenges which I believe everyone who is in immigration journey faces.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I totally agree that patience really is so necessary, right? Because it does take a lot of time to prepare a lot of these petitions as well. Like Jacob mentioned, there are a lot of documents that need to be sent over to prove these qualifications, right? So that itself can take a long time. And then USCIS processing times, right? Anyone who's ever applied for any sort of immigration status knows that it can take a really long time. So thank you so much for sharing that. And then one last question for you, Arun. There are people on the call today that may be interested in some of these visa types. What advice would you give to other community members that are either currently pursuing or thinking of pursuing some of these visas?
Yeah, definitely. There are some things. For example, the first one is that I being here, I didn't know what options do I have. So connecting your attorney and making sure that you have the options available on the table, and you're not missing out any options. Sometimes you don't know where exactly you can qualify in. So I would highly recommend to get in touch with your attorney. Uh, I mean, for example, in my case, Jake was quite helpful. He actually did a lot of research on my case. He could strike out many options, which were available for me, which I didn't know. So that's one thing. And then, of course, the time delays, sometimes even cost also, matters in some situation where they are a little reluctant to, explore options. And I would say, don't wait, connect an attorney. Uh, you would definitely have more options rather than just being a humble, as Jake said, like being humble and being very down to earth sometimes, is one of the immigrants attributes, but you have to explore options.
Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for spending time with us today. And congratulations again for your successful petitions. And
Thank
our
you.
understanding is that you now have a green card, which, of course, we always want to applaud that accomplishment. So thank you so much, Arun, for taking
Thank
the
you.
time to be with us tonight.
Thank you for having me here. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Great. And that last point Arun made is a really good segue into our first question that we received during or from the RSVPs. Someone asked what types of lawyers take these types of cases, right? Employment and education-based visas. Jacob, we know that you are one attorney in Utah that offers these services. Can you tell us about any other attorneys in the state of Utah that that work on similar cases?
Yeah, there are a ton that I would recommend. If you're in Utah County, I would look up Chad Graham or Kim Bueller Thomas. If you're in Salt Lake, I know Jennifer Ha or Lynn Leighton Tran with JLJ Group, they do it. Kelly O'Reilly with Will O'Reilly does it. Tim Wheelwright does it. I mean, there's several people. The nice thing about the immigration bar too is like I feel like it's not competitive. Like everybody just wants the immigrants to actually succeed here. So, I think everybody would just recommend the best people possible. It's strictly about the helping people get to their desired outcome.
Great. And I will personally be sending out a spreadsheet with these different attorneys, including Jake and some of these that he's mentioned, and their contact information to all of the participants. That way you can have their contact information moving forward if you decide you want to have a consultation to see what you may qualify for. Great. Thank you so much for that, Jacob. The next question that I wanted to get to, let's see. Alexander, this one's for you. Someone asked, is the professional licensing division going to consider licensing medical personnel graduated out of the US? So someone with a foreign degree, can they qualify for any sort of medical licensing?
I'd love to answer that. I was going to ask if you wanted me to give an overview first about some of the things at Doppel before getting into the specific licenses.
Yeah,
that's all right.
That would be great.
Great. So one of the first things that I've seen people get confused about is that a professional license, they'll sometimes conflate it with a work permit. So a professional license is a separate requirement from work authorization, and it's something that is required by the state of Utah. So professional licensure is going to look different from state to state. And the exciting things that are happening in Utah is that we have a very supportive governor, and his administration wants to see immigrants succeed here. And over the last 3 years, the legislature has passed new bills that make my job possible. So we have a small team that does research that looks into what the industry looks like and what the current legal requirements are. And then we find ways to evaluate and recognize foreign education and how it compares to our current requirements. So sometimes this is kind of like a one-on-one, case by case. We're looking at individuals, but ideally, we want to be able to do it with the industry, with our advisory boards, and then we'll be able to create a new pathway, as we call it, a new pathway to licensure. And then once that is established, anyone can apply through that new pathway. So like I said in my introduction, there's over 60 professions, so there's a lot of work to be done. So we can't, unfortunately, do it all at once, but our team is prioritizing professions where there's a labor shortage and also where there is demand from the immigrant community. So it's been very exciting. I've met a lot of very qualified individuals. We have had success in licensing a couple dozen people already in new pathways. So to answer that question about medical professionals, the answer is yes. We've been doing some exciting work with nursing so far, but we haven't delved into physicians and surgeons yet. So it is a hot topic across the nation. I was just on a webinar today with a bunch of different representatives from different states. Everyone's looking at what alternative pathways will look like, and we're working with our advisory board to establish that. But it won't be available in 2024, but I'm pretty hopeful that it will be in 2025.
Great. And thank you.
Oh, and sorry, there is an existing pathway to licensure for medical professionals. It is very difficult to get through. It's called the ECFMG process or certification. And so if you're a doctor, then that is the pathway you need to go through. The hardest part about it is obtaining residency in the US, and there are limited spots in residency. So it is possible, and people should definitely be working towards that. But hopefully we can add some new pathways too.
Perfect. Thank you so much for reminding me to get to your panel questions as well. My apologies for skipping out on that. That on that topic as well, we get a lot of questions from people. I know Jacob and myself do for sure of people wanting to be licensed in their field. Let's say they have a work permit, but they need certain licensing to be able to work in their field here in the US. Maybe they have that licensing in their country, but they're not sure how to transfer. How can our community stay in contact with your office and get updates as you start developing these licensing pathways? What is the best way to get a hold of you guys?
There's a couple ways. The primary one is going to be visiting our website, doppel.utah.gov. If you're unsure if you need a license to work, you can click on the page that says licenses, and there's a long list of all the professions that require a license. And if yours is not on there, then it's very likely you don't need a license. If you do find your license on there and you have questions, go ahead and follow the links to the profession to read what's currently available. If it doesn't seem like there's anything that addresses specifically for internationally trained applicants, then there's a separate page dedicated entirely to internationally trained applicants. On that page is a contact form. That's the primary place I want to direct people to, is fill out that contact form. All of your information will end up in my team's inbox, and we'll review it and respond to you and let you know whether there is a new pathway available or not, or how long it might take until there is a new one, or what you can do in the meantime. If you have questions maybe outside of a specific profession, it's more of a general question, then go ahead and email our team, which is doppelglobal@utah.gov.
Great. And I just had a question come in that I'm sure a lot of people on the call are wondering, do people need to have a certain immigration status, or are there certain requirements across the board that someone should be aware of before applying for any license?
So there's two things that we need. So on Doppel's end, we need to be able to identify you. And so previously, we only accepted a social security number, but we have recently updated that. So now we accept other forms of IDs, including ITIN and A number. Now, the most important part is a state requirement, not just for Doppel, but for other agencies, is lawful presence in the U.S. And so regardless of whether you have an ITIN or A number, you for sure need to have a valid status right now. So if you have fallen out of status, that can have some serious consequences. So we definitely encourage people to not apply until their status is lawful. And to clarify, we don't, you can qualify for a license on a tourist visa, on a student visa, on any valid status. You might not be able to work, right? You'll still need to adjust your status so that you can have work authorization. But in order to qualify for the license, we just need to know that you're in the country legally.
Great. That was very helpful. Thank you so much, Alexander. Great. Jumping back into the Q&A, Jake, this is another question for you. You're very popular, which I'm sure you're used to getting a lot of these questions. One of our participants today was an international student who graduated from a Utah university. They also completed their OPT in their field. However, the company that they were doing the OPT under couldn't sponsor them for a work visa. And so they want to know, in their case and in similar cases, what are some other options for them in a case like this?
Yeah, this is a good question. I like to be as creative as possible in these types of scenarios. There's often a lot of other options available that people are unwilling to look at. So number one, the easiest thing to do, perhaps not the most desirable option, would just be to re-enroll in a new program. Again, for long-term immigration benefits, if you finish your bachelor's degree and you haven't accumulated more than 5 years of experience, you're probably not in the best position to self-apply for a green card yet, at least through the National Interest Waiver or EB-1 yet. So number one, you could just re-enroll in school. A lot of times, and very understandably, that probably doesn't sound like the best option, especially because your options for working are pretty limited during that time. Sorry about that. But one other one that I would take a look at, if you have the requisites back, depending on what country you're from, are one of the country specific visas. So one of the most common ones that we've been doing lately are the e-visas. So the first thing you need to do is to pull out your passport and Google E2 treaty countries. The E2 or E1 or E2 visas are for applicants from certain countries that allow you to serve as a treaty trader or an investor. Essentially, you can start your own business in the US with really not that much money. There is no specific dollar amount, but depending on the business you do need to invest your own money into the business. And you can essentially self-apply for a temporary work visa. These investor visas are good for at least 2 years at a time if you apply here in the States. So for a lot of people, this is a great option. There are some of the bigger countries that do not qualify for these e-visas would be India or China or Brazil. But many other countries would, for example, Mexico, Costa Rica, Argentina, Chile, a lot of Latin American countries, as well as European and Asian countries still qualify. Honestly, if you get me on this question, I'm going to ramble a long time. There's so many different visas to look at. I'll just mention one more. One other one of the most common ones that people will look at is the O1 visa. So the reason why this is a really attractive option is that it allows you a lot of flexibility in employment because it's not limited by the lottery like the H-1B visa is. We talked a little about the H-1B visa a little earlier with Arun. And one of the biggest downsides of the H-1B visa is that it's a lottery. There's only like 80,000 of these a year. And if you don't get picked, you're straight out of luck. So unless you've got really good luck and basically the only way to increase your chances there is to have a US master's degree. So I like the O1 visa. It's very similar requirements to the EB-1A, but it is done by company sponsorship. For any specific questions, if you're really looking at an O visa, feel free to ask myself or an immigration attorney about these. Just as the last point about this, immigration saw nearly a 30% increase in O1 visa applications in 2023 compared to 2021. And the approval rates were still 90% nationally. So you have a really good chance at getting an O1 visa. They're good. The first time you get it, it's good for 3 years and you can renew it indefinitely. So yeah, any specifics, feel free to ask me. I'm happy to point you in the right direction. I will talk too much about visas if I'm allowed. So yeah, that's it.
No worries. Yeah, those are all really good to know. And that answers another question we had about options for someone who isn't selected for the H-1B lottery. So that's a great answer for that as well. My next question, and Enrique or Jacob, whichever one of you feels comfortable answering this, someone asked, can a fully undocumented student or undocumented professional engage in business creation? Or in other words, can they start their own business in the US or can they start a nonprofit? That's the first question. And then the second question kind of ties into what we were talking about at the beginning about the uncertainty of the incoming administration under President Trump. The question is, should students continue to be in school, especially now, given the new president-elect Trump coming into office? So the first one was, can an undocumented student or professional create a business or a nonprofit? And the second one is, would you encourage a student to be in school if they are undocumented with the incoming administration?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd like to start with that second part first. Stay in school. As you guys just saw with Jacob's presentation, a lot of times opportunities will present themselves where you need to have a degree or you need to have other qualifications, and there's no time like the present. So, despite, who's in office, always look out for yourself, always continue to better yourself in one way or another. And education is oftentimes a way in which you are able to prove yourself. And so having a degree is going to not only benefit you potentially in the future for immigration, but it will also help you find different employment opportunities that you didn't have before. So stay in school, regardless of who's in office. Lily pointed this out earlier. Despite whoever's in the office, there's still a Congress that needs to pass things. And so, despite the president administration's agenda, nothing is going to happen immediately on day one. So, if and when we need to cross that bridge, we will do so. But for now, stay in school, continue to better yourselves in the realm of education. And then when it comes to opening up businesses or opening nonprofits, my understanding is yes, you are able to open a business, create an LLC. All of this is able to be done through an ITIN, I believe. So as long as you are able to follow the tax laws, yes, you are able to do so. And Jake, I'm not sure if you want to add anything to that. That is my understanding of it.
Yeah, I know. Thanks so much, Enrique. I do this quite a bit for you're Enrique's right. That's the summary of what I was going to say. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. And yes, I just want to echo what Enrique has just shared about the importance of local advocacy. If you are someone that finds yourself worried about what the incoming administration could do to impact you and your family in regards to immigration, I would definitely just echo what Enrique said about the importance of speaking to our elected officials here in Utah, right? Our Congress members and members of the Senate that are part of these conversations, right? And we know that the power lies within Congress to pass immigration reform. Although the president can influence and there are certain executive actions that they can take, in the end, we are really counting on Congress to work together to pass immigration reform that we need. And I just want to plug really quickly that Voices for Utah Children. We do a lot of advocacy on the Hill during the legislative session, which in Utah is from mid-January to March. The legislative session is the time when our elected officials come together to discuss different bills and pass different bills, and is a great time to meet your elected officials and tell them about your story and the concerns that you have. So if this is something that you're interested in participating in and advocating about these issues or on these issues, feel free to contact me and we can definitely schedule a time to connect you with your elected official and share any concerns or requests that you have, because your voice is important in this case, and you all have a lot to share. So thank you so much for reminding us of that, Enrique. And also, in just reminding everyone that to hope for the best with the incoming administration, but to prepare for the worst, right? Any emergency preparedness plans that you and your family need to do, scheduling meetings with immigration attorneys to make sure you have a full understanding of what you or your family members could qualify for is a great way to, again, hope for the best, but prepare for the worst, so that we can be prepared as a community. And as Voices for Utah Children, we're also working on creating a contingency plan for community members that has a list of resources to help us be prepared for any emergencies that may come up or needs. Great. I have another question, and again, anyone can jump in. This is a question specific to someone who did not qualify for DACA or maybe qualified but didn't send in their petition in time before initial applications were paused. The question is, are potential sponsorship opportunities for a non-DACA student with a BSN in nursing available? So are there any legal options available for someone in this situation?
Yeah, I can chime in here. So having an undergrad or having a bachelor's in nursing is a really, really great position to be in. So as I mentioned earlier, for most for pretty much every other occupation, the most common way to obtain a work-based green card is to have a company sponsor you. And transparently, this process kind of sucks, for lack of a better term. It takes a long time, depending on your position. It could take anywhere from like 2.5 to like 4 years, because you have to advertise the job to U.S. workers to show there's not qualified or available people, and you have to wait for the government to process your case. So a lot of times it's taking more than 14 months for them to process these. So I say all that to say, for nurses, and nurse is a very special occupation in that you can apply for your green card through something called Schedule A. It basically will save you anywhere from like a year or two of processing time if you apply as a nurse. You can just apply directly for a green card, essentially, without having to go through the Department of Labor for the most part. That's essentially how that works.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that, Jacob. I also see we're getting some questions in the Q&A feature, and Jake, I see that you are responding to some of them, so thank you for doing that. Feel free to continue to send in questions through that Q&A chat. Alexander, go ahead.
Jake, please correct me if I'm wrong. Would there be opportunities for a nurse through the TN visa if they're from Canada or Mexico, or would that require that they leave the country in order to come back in?
No, you're exactly right, Alexander. You could totally do it through the TN as well if you're Canadian or Mexican. So I've been seeing personally an increase of these types of cases here, basically in the last 2 years. I think you actually kind of mentioned this earlier. The only downside of these types of processes for foreign nurses is the visa screen. Basically, the process of getting that CGFNS organization to give you that is a giant pain. So yeah, but TN visa is a great option for you if you're Canadian or Mexican and you're a nurse.
Great. Yeah, thanks for highlighting that, Alexander. I really appreciate it. Great. One last question that we got from the RSVPs. And again, I just want to thank everyone who's joining us tonight. These are all great questions. Some of them are very specific, and I'm sure a lot of you are in very overwhelming situations. So I do want to just extend support and thank you all for joining us and for taking this time to join us and ask these questions and be vulnerable. I think many of you would be surprised to learn how many are in similar situations. So thank you for voicing these questions that I'm sure many are hoping to get answers to. I am going to proceed with the last question we received from the RSVPs. So this last question says, are there still any opportunities for people to receive a work visa if they have a voluntary leave or voluntary departure? Again, to any of the panelists on here tonight, can you tell us a little bit about what voluntary leave or departure is, and if there are any opportunities available for people in this situation?
I can chime in on this. Yeah, so essentially, voluntary departure is the better option than being removed. A lot of times, depending on your facts, the immigration judge will offer, or the DHS will essentially offer a foreign national who is in removal proceedings the ability to voluntarily leave. And the benefit of doing this is that you do not have a removal order that is on your record. This could be really helpful because you don't have to apply for readmission to the United States, because otherwise, for people who are deported, it counts as a removal order. And unless you wait outside the United States for the full period of time that you were to be out, you have to apply to ask for permission to reapply for a visa to come back. So voluntary departure does give you some benefit there. Now, depending on the amount of time that you have been outside the US, even with voluntary departure, you may still be subject to one of the unlawful presence bars, depending on your reasons that you were forced to leave. So for most people, if you were here in the US for more than 1 year without authorization and you leave, you have triggered something called the 10-year bar, which essentially means you cannot come back to the United States for 10 years unless you apply for readmission to come back. Now, Enrique had previously touched on this D3 waiver. This is named after the section under the Immigration and Nationality Act, the section 212 D3, which discusses that the Attorney General, through the Department of Homeland Security, has the ability to essentially exercise his discretion and allow a foreign national to enter the United States, even where they may be in this same situation, right? That you have you've left via voluntary departure. You would need to show evidence of the pros and cons of your entry. Obviously, the pros will need to outweigh the cons because it is purely discretionary. So you could pursue that path. If you're outside the United States, you can apply for this D3 waiver at the consulates abroad that you're applying for your visa through. You would just file your petition with USCIS and then ask for your waiver at the US consulate. This is all very high level general information. Honestly, in this specific position, I'm not envious of you. There are several hoops you're going to have to jump through in order to come back, but it's definitely not impossible. I'll just end with that.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that, Jacob. And again, to all of you for asking your questions. I also see that Jacob took the time to answer some of the questions that were sent in through the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. So if you submitted a question, feel free to check out Jacob's response there. Great. Before we wrap up, I just wanted to check in and see with the panelists if any comments came up as we were going through the Q&A feature before we wrap up, or if any of you have any last comments for our attendees. Okay, great. Well, again, I just want to thank all the participants tonight, Arun, Alexander, Enrique, and Jacob, for sharing your expertise with all of us tonight. This webinar was recorded, and so I will make sure to send this out to all of you so that you can watch this later on in case you missed any of it or want to replay some of the information. I will also be sending out the spreadsheet with the contact information for Jacob and the other attorneys that he mentioned that offer legal services for these different visas that we discussed today. We understand that they are very complex, and I just want to echo Arun's suggestion to always consult with an attorney when considering any of these options, because unfortunately these are very complicated processes. And they can be very costly as well. So you don't want to mess up because it will cost you a few $1,000s. And having that legal advice is always very helpful. So thank you again to all the participants and to everyone that joined tonight. If you have any other questions that are more private, feel free to contact me directly at liliana@utahchildren.org, and we can do our best to reach out to you individually. But again, thank you all so much for joining us tonight, and we will see you all next time.
Thanks, Lily. Thank you, everyone.